It's past midnight, and the only sound in the room is the soft, rhythmic breathing of my wife Sarah beside me. The house is still, wrapped in the kind of profound quiet that only settles over a sleeping suburban neighborhood. On the surface, it is a portrait of peace, of domestic tranquility, a perfect life. But inside my head, a storm is raging, and on my skin, a ghost lingers. It's the scent of her perfume, a fragrance of night-blooming jasmine and something else, something wild and sweet that has no place in this sterile, ordered room. It's Maya's scent, and it's a brand of guilt I can't wash away. I close my eyes, but sleep is a distant country I cannot reach. Instead, I see her kitchen from just a few hours ago, bathed in the dim glow of the under-cabinet lights. I see the frantic desperation in her eyes mirroring my own. I feel the cool press of the granite countertop against her bare skin, the heat of her body arching against mine. I can still hear the sounds we tried so desperately to muffle, the soft, wet slap of skin on skin, the stifled moans that were more potent than any scream, a symphony of forbidden pleasure played in whispers. It was reckless, it was madness, and it was the most alive I have felt in a decade. Now, lying here, in this king-size bed, in this beautiful house I designed myself, next to the woman I vowed to love forever, I am a fraud. This life, with its manicured lawn, its two-car garage, and its calendar full of soccer practices and parent-teacher conferences, is the life every man is supposed to want. It is my gilded cage, and for years I didn't even realize I was a prisoner until I looked over the fence and saw her. I opened my eyes and turned my head towards the window. Across the lawn, her house is dark now. Her light has gone out, but I know she's in there, just as I am in here. She was my escape, the woman next door, my beautiful sweet poison. And this is my confession, a story whispered into the dark about how the most beautiful thing in my life became my complete and utter ruin. The slow burn began on a sweltering Saturday in late July, the kind of day where the heat radiates up from the asphalt in shimmering waves, and the air is thick with the scent of cut grass and chlorine from a distant pool. I remember the groan and hiss of the moving truck's air brakes as it parked in front of the house next door, the one that had been empty for months, a silent placeholder in our perfect suburban tableau. I was in my study, supposedly reviewing blueprints, but really just staring out the window, feeling the familiar Sunday afternoon restlessness creep in. From my vantage point, I saw her for the first time. She wasn't what I expected. The previous owners had been a boisterous family with 3 loud boys. This woman was alone. She stepped out of the truck's passenger side, and my first impression wasn't one of overt beauty, but of a weary, determined grace. She was wearing simple jeans and a gray t-shirt that was already damp with sweat across her back and at the nape of her neck. She tied her hair up, a thick, dark mane of it, into a messy bun, but strands immediately escaped, clinging to her temples and cheeks. She stood for a moment, hands on her hips, surveying the house as if it were both a fortress and a challenge. Then she got to work. I watched for an hour as she carried boxes, her movements efficient and strong, never faltering. I watched her longer than a neighbor probably should. I told myself it was just curiosity. Sarah and the kids were out at the town pool, and the house was quiet, leaving my thoughts to echo. Finally, I saw her struggle with a particularly large box, her arms trembling slightly with the effort. That was my cue, the excuse I didn't know I was waiting for. I put down my pen, walked downstairs, and stepped out into the oppressive heat. The closer I got, the more real she became. I could see the faint flush under her skin, the sheen of perspiration on her brow. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and in the harsh afternoon light, I could see the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes. But those eyes, they were a deep, startling shade of green, and they met mine with a mixture of surprise and guardedness. "Need a hand with that?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet air. She hesitated for just a second, a flicker of pride or maybe suspicion in her gaze, before she gave a small, tired smile. "I'm not sure I can say no," she admitted, her voice a little husky. I think my ambition outweighed my arm strength on this one. I took one side of the box, and my fingers brushed against hers. It was nothing, a fleeting, incidental touch, but it felt like a static charge, a tiny spark in the humid air. We maneuvered the box up the walkway and through the front door, setting it down in the empty living room. The air inside was stale and hot. "I'm Ethan, by the way," I said, wiping a bead of sweat from my temple. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "Maya," she replied, her smile a little wider this time, a little more genuine. "Thanks, Ethan. I really appreciate it." We talked for a few minutes, the usual neighborly things, where she was from, what I did for a living. It was all perfectly innocent, perfectly mundane, but underneath the words, there was a current, a low hum of awareness that I hadn't felt in years. I was acutely aware of the space between us, of the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, of the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. When I finally left her to her unpacking and walked back across my own perfectly manicured lawn, I felt different. The world seemed to have shifted on its axis, just slightly. In the weeks that followed, our lives began to intertwine in small, almost imperceptible ways. A shared rhythm began to develop, a silent dance conducted across the 50 feet of grass that separated our homes. I started timing my morning coffee to when she would be in her garden, watering the new flowers she had planted. I'd stand at my kitchen window, mug in hand, and watch her. She had this way of tilting her head when she was concentrating, a gesture that exposed the long, elegant curve of her neck. I found myself admiring her bare feet in the damp grass, the focused set of her jaw. She was a world unto herself in those moments, and I was a silent, captivated observer. The weekend yard work that I used to dread became an opportunity. I'd find reasons to trim the hedges that bordered our properties, to weed the flower beds on her side of the house, hoping she would be outside. Often, she was. We'd talk over the low wooden fence. The conversations were never deep. They were about the coming rain, or the stubbornness of dandelions, or the local deer that ate her new roses. But her laughter, a low, warm sound that the breeze would carry over to me, became a kind of music I craved. I started to learn her. I learned that she bit her bottom lip when she was thinking, that she had a tiny scar just above her left eyebrow, that she loved the smell of rain on hot pavement. These were tiny, useless pieces of information, yet I collected them like treasures. At home, my own life continued on its predictable track. The familiar chaos of dinner with the kids, their stories tumbling over each other. The quiet evenings with Sarah, sitting on the same couch, watching the same shows. The space between us filled with a comfortable but passionless silence. I loved my wife. I truly did. But our love had become a well-worn piece of furniture. It was reliable, it was sturdy, but the thrill was gone. The conversations were about logistics, about schedules, about mortgages. The goodnight kisses were chaste, a familiar ritual devoid of heat, and then I would lie in the dark and think of Maya. I would think of her independence, her quiet solitude. It seemed so much more honest than the noisy emptiness of my own home. She was a mystery, a blank canvas, while my own life felt like a story that had already been written, read, and placed back on the shelf. I began to find more excuses. A piece of her mail delivered to my box by mistake became a reason to knock on her door. I'd see her bringing in groceries and hurry out to offer help. Each interaction was a small dose of a drug I was becoming addicted to. I'd replay our brief conversations in my head, dissecting her words, her expressions, searching for a sign that she felt it too, this strange, invisible pull between us. I was no longer just a passive observer. I was actively seeking her out, engineering these small moments. It was a dangerous game, and a part of me, the good husband and father, screamed in silent protest. But another part of me, a part I had thought was long dead and buried, was waking up. It was a hungry, selfish part that didn't care about the rules. It only knew that for the first time in a very long time, I felt the spark of something new, something thrilling and terrifying. The slow burn had taken hold, and I knew with a certainty that both thrilled and sickened me that I was going to do nothing to put it out. I was going to let it consume me. The moment the line was blurred forever happened on a Tuesday night in late August. The air had finally cooled, carrying the first, faint promise of autumn. Through the kitchen window, I watched Sarah shepherd the kids upstairs for bed, her voice a familiar, gentle murmur that was part of the house's nightly soundtrack. I should have felt contentment, a sense of peace in the predictable rhythm of my life. Instead, a profound loneliness washed over me, so sharp and sudden it was like a physical pain. It was in that moment that I glanced across the lawn and saw her. Maya was sitting on the top step of her back porch, her silhouette barely visible in the deepening twilight. She wasn't reading or drinking or talking on the phone. She was just sitting there, her shoulders slumped, and even from that distance, I could feel the waves of sorrow coming off of her. My house was full of life, yet I felt empty. Her house was empty, and she was the embodiment of that emptiness. A strange, magnetic pull urged me to go to her. It wasn't just desire, not then. It was something more complex, a sense of kinship with her loneliness. I found myself opening the wine cabinet, my hands moving with a purpose that felt both foreign and preordained. I uncorked a bottle of red wine, the sound echoing in the now quiet kitchen. I poured 2 glasses, my heart starting a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. This was different. This wasn't a chance encounter by the mailbox. This was a choice. With a glass in each hand, I walked out my back door, the cool grass damp against my shoes, and crossed the invisible boundary between our 2 worlds. She heard me approach and looked up. In the faint light from her kitchen window, I could see that she had been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed and glistening, and she hastily wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand. For a second, I felt like an intruder, a clumsy trespasser on her private grief. I almost turned back. "Bad time?" I asked softly, holding up the glasses as a kind of peace offering. She stared at the wine, then at my face, and a wry, heartbreaking smile touched her lips. "Is there ever a good time?" she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. She shifted over on the step, making room for me. I sat down beside her, the wood still warm from the day's sun, and handed her a glass. Our fingers brushed again as she took it, and this time, the spark lingered, a low-voltage hum that traveled up my arm. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant rumble of a car on the main road. We just drank, 2 lonely souls sharing a bottle of wine in the dark. It was Maya who spoke first. "Some days are fine," she began, her voice barely a whisper, as she stared into the dark abyss of her backyard. "I keep busy. I unpack another box. I hang a picture. I pretend I'm building a new life. And then a night like this comes along and the silence, it gets so loud it's a physical thing. I can feel the emptiness of the rooms behind me. I can still hear the echoes of a life that isn't there anymore." She took a shaky breath. "He left a book on the nightstand. A stupid paperback. It's been there since the day he left, and tonight I finally picked it up to throw it away, and a receipt he was using as a bookmark fell out. It was from that little Italian place we used to go to for our anniversary, and I broke." She didn't weep loudly, but quiet, steady tears traced paths down her cheeks. I listened, and I didn't offer empty platitudes. I didn't say, "It'll get better," or "You're better off without him." I just listened as she spoke, of broken promises and the slow, painful death of a shared dream. And as she spoke, a dam inside of me began to crack. Her raw, unfiltered honesty was an invitation, and I accepted it. When she finally fell silent, I found my own voice, rough with emotions I had kept buried for years. "I know what you mean about the silence," I said, my voice low. "It's different for me. My house is never silent. There's always the television, or the kids yelling, or Sarah on the phone. But in the middle of all that noise, I've never felt more alone." I told her things I had never said out loud to anyone, not even to myself. I spoke of the slow drift in my marriage, how my wife and I had become more like business partners running a small, domestic corporation than lovers. I talked about feeling like a ghost in my own life, a functional component whose primary purpose was to earn a paycheck and fix things that were broken. I confessed that sometimes I would look at Sarah and try to remember the girl I fell in love with, and all I could see was a stranger who knew how I liked my coffee and when the car insurance was due. "I feel invisible," I finally admitted, the word hanging in the air between us, heavy and true. "It's like I'm watching my own life from behind a sheet of glass." I'm there, but I can't touch anything. I can't feel anything. Her tears had stopped. She was looking at me now, her green eyes wide and full of a profound, startling understanding. She saw me. In that moment, sitting on a porch step in the dark, I felt more seen than I had in a decade of marriage. The emotional intimacy was so intense it was almost unbearable. The air grew thick with everything we weren't saying. The conversation had stripped us bare, leaving only our shared loneliness and a raw, burgeoning need. I didn't even think about it. My body moved on its own. I reached out and placed my hand on her shoulder. It was meant to be a simple gesture of comfort, a mirror of the empathy she had just shown me. But the moment my palm met the warm, soft fabric of her shirt, and I felt the delicate bones and the living warmth of her skin beneath it, everything changed. I didn't pull away. My thumb moved, just a fraction of an inch, caressing the side of her neck. Her breath hitched, a tiny, audible gasp in the quiet. I felt a tremor run through her. My heart was pounding, a frantic, wild thing in my chest. I lifted my gaze from her shoulder to her face. Our eyes locked. And in that long, silent, suspended moment, the line was not just crossed, it was obliterated. There was no more pretense of being just neighbors. In her eyes, I saw a reflection of my own desperate hunger. I saw her loneliness calling out to my loneliness. I saw the question and the answer all at once. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and irrevocable moment of recognition. A silent agreement had been forged in the dark. The question was no longer if, it was when. The days that followed our conversation on the porch were a study in exquisite torture. Nothing had happened, and yet everything had changed. The air between our two houses was now thick, with a palpable humming energy, a field of force that seemed to pull us together. The casual, neighborly dance we once performed was over, replaced by a new choreography of lingering glances and charged silences. When I saw her through my kitchen window now, she would hold my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips before she turned away. That smile was a secret we shared, a silent acknowledgement of the confessions we had exchanged in the dark. It was an invitation, a promise, and a warning, all at once. My obsession, which had been a slow-burning ember, was now a conflagration consuming my thoughts. I was useless. At work, I would stare at architectural plans, my mind tracing not the lines of a building, but the curve of her neck as she had tilted her head to listen to me. The precise angles of a roofline would dissolve into the memory of her shoulders, slumped in sorrow. I sat in meetings about zoning laws and structural integrity, but the only voice I heard was hers, whispering about the deafening silence of her empty house. I was physically present in my life, but my mind, my soul, had taken up residence in the house next door. My own home felt like a foreign country. The cheerful chatter of my children felt muted, as if heard from underwater. Sarah's touch, once a source of comfort, now felt like a brand of my hypocrisy. One evening, she leaned in to kiss me goodnight, and for a terrifying split second, as I closed my eyes, I imagined it was Maya's lips, and I almost recoiled. The guilt was a physical weight in my gut, but it was no match for the insatiable, clawing hunger that had awakened inside me. I began to fantasize constantly, creating vivid, detailed scenarios in my mind. I imagined pressing her against the wall in her hallway, my mouth finally claiming hers, tasting the wine and the salt of her tears. I imagined undressing her slowly, rediscovering the body I had only glimpsed, learning the secrets of her skin. Lying in my own bed, next to my sleeping wife, was the worst. The darkness was a canvas, and my imagination painted masterpieces of sin upon it. I would turn onto my side, facing the window, facing her house, and ache. It was a deep, visceral, primal ache, a longing so profound it felt like a sickness. I wanted her. It was no longer a vague attraction or a crush on the pretty neighbor. It was a desperate, all-consuming need. I felt like a man dying of thirst who had been shown a single, perfect glass of water and then had it placed just beyond his reach. The break came on a Thursday afternoon. I was trying to force myself to focus on an email when my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but but I knew instantly who it was. The message was simple. Hey, Ethan. I have a ridiculously leaky faucet in my kitchen and it's driving me insane. I know it's a long shot, but any chance you know your way around a pipe wrench? I can offer terrible coffee or a beer as payment. My heart hammered against my ribs. I read the message 3 times. A leaky faucet. It was the oldest, most transparent excuse in the book, and it was the most beautiful sentence I had ever read. It was permission. It was the key to the lock. The pretense was paper thin, and we both knew it. This wasn't about plumbing. This was the formal invitation to cross the threshold, to step out of the world of longing glances and secret smiles and into the world of touch. I texted back, my fingers trembling slightly. I'm no expert, but I can certainly take a look. I'll be over in 10. The walk from my front door to hers felt like the longest journey of my life. I had grabbed my toolbox from the garage, the cold, heavy metal a ridiculous prop in this unfolding drama. With every step, a voice of reason screamed in my head. Turn back. Go home to your wife. You are a husband, a father. This is madness. But the pull towards her house was gravitational, undeniable. My feet kept moving, carrying me towards the flame that I knew would burn me. When she opened the door, the sight of her stole the air from my lungs. She was wearing a simple, soft-looking sundress, patterned with tiny flowers. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves over her shoulders. She wore no makeup and she looked nervous, her green eyes bright and impossibly wide. The hero arrives, she said, her voice a little breathless. She led me into the kitchen. Her house smelled of her, that intoxicating scent of jasmine and something uniquely her own. It was a space that felt lived in, wonderfully imperfect. A stack of books sat on a chair, a half-empty teacup was on the counter, and a colorful, abstract painting she was clearly working on rested on an easel in the corner. It was a world away from my own home's curated Pottery Barn perfection. Her home was alive, it was her. It was real. And in the center of it all was the sound that had brought me here, the steady, rhythmic plink, plink, plink of water dripping into the stainless steel sink. It sounded like a countdown. It's the monster that's been keeping me up at night, she said, gesturing to the faucet. I set my toolbox down, the metallic clank unnaturally loud in the quiet tension of the room. I leaned over the sink, pretending to inspect the fixture. She leaned in beside me, pointing. It seems to be coming from the base here, she said. She was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her arm, so close I could see the tiny, golden flecks in her green eyes. My senses were on fire. The dripping sound seemed to grow louder, each drop marking a second of unbearable, delicious proximity. I knelt down to look at the pipes underneath, and the space was impossibly small. She knelt beside me, her head close to mine as we peered into the dark cabinet. See anything? She whispered, her breath warm against my ear. I could barely think. Her knee was pressed against mine, her hair brushed against my cheek. The scent of her was overwhelming. I fumbled with a wrench, my mind a complete blank. I tightened a coupling, my movements clumsy and mechanical. I had no idea what I was doing. The real work was happening in the 6 inches of air between our bodies, a space crackling with unspoken energy. My blood was roaring in my ears, almost drowning out the sound of the drip. After a few minutes of my charade, I slid out from under the sink and stood up, my legs unsteady. Try it now, I said, my voice hoarse. She reached out and turned the handle. The gush of water was followed by a perfect, resounding silence. The dripping had stopped. The excuse was gone. The prop had been put away. We were left standing in the middle of her kitchen, the silence stretching between us, a taut, vibrating wire. She looked from the silent faucet to my eyes. The nervous energy was gone from her expression, replaced by a raw, undisguised vulnerability. Her chest rose and fell with a deep breath. She didn't say thank you. She didn't smile. She just looked at me, her eyes asking the question that had been hanging between us for weeks. And in that moment, I knew I was about to give her the answer. The point of no return wasn't a line I was about to cross. I had already crossed it the moment I picked up my toolbox. This was just the final, inevitable step off the cliff. The silence in the kitchen was a living thing. The absence of the dripping faucet had created a vacuum, and all the unspoken words, all the pent-up longing from the past weeks, rushed in to fill it. Maya stood frozen, her hand still on the faucet handle, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. Her eyes were locked on mine, wide and dark, and full of a terrifying, beautiful surrender. The world narrowed to the space between us, a chasm of maybe 5 feet that felt both impossibly vast and terrifyingly small. I saw the tremor in her lower lip, and it was my undoing. I don't remember deciding to move. My body simply took over, closing the distance in 2 long strides. My hand came up, not with the frantic desperation I felt, but with a strange, reverent slowness, as if I were reaching for something holy. I cupped her jaw, my thumb stroking the soft skin just beneath her ear. She didn't flinch. She leaned into my touch, a soft, almost inaudible sigh escaping her lips as she closed her eyes. That was all the confirmation I needed. I lowered my head and my mouth found hers. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a collision, a frantic, desperate claiming. All the weeks of stolen glances, of silent fantasies, of aching loneliness exploded in that single point of contact. It was a kiss of raw hunger, of starvation. I tasted the lingering coolness of water on her lips, and underneath it, the warm, intoxicating taste of her. Her hands flew up, tangling in my hair, pulling me closer, her fingers gripping the back of my head as if she were afraid I might disappear. My other arm wrapped around her waist, crushing her against me, and I felt her body melt into mine, a perfect, long-desired fit. We were clumsy and ravenous, our teeth clicking, our breaths mingling in ragged, desperate gasps. The kiss wasn't enough. It was only the beginning, the lighting of the fuse. My hands started to roam, greedy and impatient. I slid them from her waist, down the curve of her back, finally claiming the shape I had memorized from afar. My hands cupped her buttocks, squeezing the firm, round flesh through the thin fabric of her sundress. She moaned into my mouth, a low, guttural sound of pure pleasure that sent a shockwave of desire straight to my core. This was real. This was happening. My hands moved to the front of her dress, fumbling with the tiny buttons, my fingers feeling thick and useless. A frustrated growl escaped my throat, and she seemed to understand. She pulled back for a second, her eyes blazing, and with a single, decisive motion, she ripped the front of her own dress open, the sound of popping buttons like gunshots in the silent kitchen. And then I saw her, the soft, pale skin of her chest, the swell of her breasts barely contained by a simple lace bra. I didn't hesitate. I pushed aside the flimsy fabric and lowered my head, my mouth closing over one perfect, hardened peak. She cried out, a sharp, stifled sound, and her head fell back, her neck arching, offering me more. I tasted her skin, worshipped her, my tongue and lips learning the shape of her, the scent of her driving me insane. In that moment, there was no thought. There was no Sarah, no children, no life next door. There was only this kitchen, this woman, and this all-consuming fire. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I hooked my arms under her legs and lifted her. She was surprisingly light. She instinctively wrapped her legs around my waist as I placed her on the cool granite countertop. The barrier of the cold stone against her hot skin made her gasp again. Now she was at my level, her face inches from mine. I ripped my own shirt off, buttons scattering on the floor, and pressed my bare chest against hers. The feeling of her skin, her breasts crushed against me, was everything I had imagined and more. Her hands were everywhere, exploring my shoulders, my back, her nails scraping lightly, leaving trails of fire in their wake. I tugged at the rest of her dress, at the panties underneath, until they were pooled around her ankles, and she was completely bare for me. I stepped back for a half second, just to look at her. Bathed in the dim kitchen light, perched on the counter with her legs parted for me, she was a vision of sin and surrender. It was the most erotic, most beautiful sight I had ever seen. I moved back between her legs, my hands exploring every inch of her. I kissed her deeply, my hand sliding down her flat stomach, through the soft curls of hair, and into the wet heat between her legs. She was slick and ready for me. Her hips bucked against my hand, and she whispered my name, a broken, pleading sound. "Ethan, please." There was no more waiting. I unbuckled my belt, my fingers shaking, and freed myself. The sound of our breathing was harsh and loud in the kitchen. I guided myself to her entrance, the feeling of our bodies finally meeting in the most intimate way imaginable sending a jolt through my entire system. I pushed into her slowly at first, and her eyes widened, her hands gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles were white. Then I plunged forward, burying myself deep inside her. We both cried out, a simultaneous gasp of pain and pleasure and relief. And then the storm broke. Our movements were frantic, a desperate rhythm born of pure, animalistic need. It wasn't lovemaking, it was something far more primal. It was a frantic, almost violent coupling on a kitchen counter, a desperate attempt to erase loneliness, to feel something, anything, other than the quiet desperation of our lives. I held her face in my hands, kissing her, my body pumping into hers. I watched her eyes, saw them glaze over with pure, unadulterated lust. The sounds were incredible, the wet slap of our bodies colliding, our ragged moans that we tried to swallow, the creak of the cabinets as she braced herself. I wrapped my arms around her, burying my face in the crook of her neck, losing myself in the scent of her skin and hair as I drove into her again and again. I felt her body begin to tense, to tremble. A low, continuous moan started deep in her throat. She threw her head back, her back arching off the counter, her inner muscles clenching around me in exquisite, pulsing waves. Her release triggered my own, a massive, shuddering climax that ripped through me with the force of a lightning strike, emptying me of all the tension, all the longing, all the lonely nights. It was a pure, white-hot oblivion. I collapsed against her, my forehead resting on hers, our bodies slick with sweat, our hearts hammering in unison. For a long moment, we just stayed there, panting, clinging to each other, two shipwreck survivors washed ashore. The storm had passed, leaving behind a devastating, beautiful silence. And in that silence, as the first waves of reality began to lap at the edges of my consciousness, I knew that my life, the one I had left just across the lawn, would never, ever be the same. The days following our explosion in her kitchen were a strange dream. Reality seemed thin, a translucent film over the vibrant, pulsing memory of what we had done. At home, I moved through the motions of my life, a polite automaton. I smiled at Sarah, helped my son with his homework, read my daughter a bedtime story, but I wasn't really there. My body was in my house, but my soul was next door, replaying every stolen second. The memory of her taste, the sound of her gasps, the feeling of her skin beneath my hands, it was a constant, humming presence under the surface of my skin. We didn't speak for 2 days. We didn't need to. We would catch glimpses of each other through our windows, and a silent, knowing look was all that passed between us. It was an acknowledgement, a shared secret that bound us tighter than any words could. The invitation came on Wednesday, via a simple text message. They're showing old movies at the town square Friday night. Sarah mentioned she was taking the kids. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a presentation of an opportunity, a window of time carved out of our separate lives, just for us. My reply was just as simple. I have to work late on a project. The lie was effortless, a smooth, practiced stone skipping across the surface of my life. The plan was made. There was no pretense this time, no leaky faucet, no flimsy excuse. We were consciously, deliberately planning to sin. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Friday night arrived with an agonizing slowness. I watched Sarah herd the kids into the minivan, their faces bright with excitement about the movie and popcorn. She leaned in through my car window as I sat in the driveway, pretending to review some papers. "Don't work too late, honey," she said, kissing my cheek. Her perfume was a familiar, comforting scent of lavender and vanilla. It smelled like home. It smelled like safety. When her taillights disappeared around the corner, I waited for 5 minutes, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, before I killed my engine, got out of the car, and walked to Maya's front door. She opened it before I could knock, as if she'd been waiting right there. She didn't speak. She just took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine, and led me through the quiet house and up the stairs. Her bedroom was cast in shadow, the only light coming from a single, small lamp on her bedside table, which bathed everything in a soft golden glow. The air was thick with her scent, and the room was a reflection of her, a little messy, deeply personal, and incredibly sensual. She led me to the edge of her bed and finally turned to face me. "This time," she whispered, her voice a low, husky promise. "We have time." She reached up and began to unbutton my shirt, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving mine. With each button she released, a layer of my other life seemed to fall away. She pushed the shirt off my shoulders, letting it drop to the floor. Her palms were warm as she flattened them against my chest, her fingers tracing the muscles, learning my shape. Then it was my turn. I reached for the zipper on the back of her dress, my hands trembling slightly. I lowered it slowly, inch by inch, savoring the unveiling. The fabric parted, revealing the smooth, pale skin of her back. I leaned in and pressed a line of soft kisses from the nape of her neck all the way down her spine as I slid the dress from her body. It pooled at her feet, leaving her standing before me in nothing but a simple black bra and panties. She was breathtaking. I unhooked her bra, letting it fall, and for the first time I truly saw her. Her breasts were perfect, high and full, what I had once fantasized about as snowy peaks in my lonely daydreams. In the warm lamplight, her skin seemed to glow, her nipples tight, rosy buds that begged for my attention. I knelt before her, a willing subject before his queen, and took one into my mouth. I worshipped her, laving the peak with my tongue, suckling gently, my hands cupping the heavy softness of both breasts. She moaned softly, a pure, sweet sound of surrender, her fingers tangling in my hair, holding me to her. I moved to the other breast, giving it the same reverent attention, until she was breathing in short, sharp gasps. I slid her panties down her legs, my hands tracing the curve of her hips, the flare of her thighs. She stood nude before me, completely vulnerable, completely beautiful. I didn't rush to take her. I simply explored. I kissed my way down her flat stomach, my tongue dipping into the hollow of her navel. I felt the muscles in her abdomen quiver under my lips. I continued my journey downward, over the gentle mound of her femininity, the scent of her arousal drawing me in. I knelt between her legs and looked up at her. Her eyes were closed, her head thrown back, her lips parted. She was the living embodiment of pleasure. I parted her soft folds with my thumbs and began to taste her. I learned the flavor of her desire, the sweet, musky taste of her. My tongue explored her delicate little sister, tracing every contour, finding the hard pearl of her clitoris and circling it gently. Her breath hitched. Her hips began to move in a slow, instinctive rhythm against my mouth. I increased the pressure, my tongue becoming more insistent. The soft moans she was making began to deepen, to grow in volume. "Oh God, Ethan," she whispered, her hands gripping my shoulders. I felt the moment her pleasure began to crest, the way her inner muscles began to flutter against my tongue. I didn't stop. I drove her higher, a relentless, gentle assault, until with a sharp cry, her whole body convulsed, her release washing over her in shuddering waves. She sagged against me, boneless and spent, and I held her until her breathing returned to normal. Then, with a newfound strength in her eyes, she gently pushed me back onto the bed. "My turn," she whispered, a seductive smile playing on her lips. She straddled my legs, her hands roaming over my body just as I had explored hers. She seemed fascinated by the feel of my chest, my arms, the muscles in my stomach. Her touch was electric, reigniting the fire within me. She moved lower, her hair tickling my thighs as she bent her head. Her warm, wet mouth enveloped my little brother, and a groan of pure, unadulterated pleasure was ripped from my throat. It was a sensation beyond anything I had ever known. She was an artist, her tongue and lips creating a masterpiece of sensation. I gripped the bed sheets, my knuckles white, fighting for control. It was a battle between the overwhelming urge to release and the desperate desire to make this moment last in eternity. She would bring me to the very edge, then pull back, her eyes glinting with a playful power in the dim light, before taking me back into the wet heat of her mouth. The intimacy of it was staggering. It was a complete surrender, a giving and taking of pleasure so profound it felt spiritual. Finally, I could hold on no longer. With a guttural cry, I gave myself over to the feeling, my release explosive and total. She stayed with me, swallowing every last drop, before moving up to lie beside me, her head resting on my chest. We lay there in the golden light, our bodies slick and our breathing ragged, wrapped in a profound silence. We hadn't had sex, not in the traditional sense. We had done something far more intimate. We had learned the language of each other's bodies. We had mapped each other's pleasure points, tasted each other's release. The frantic storm of our first encounter had been replaced by a deep, knowing current of pure physical worship. And that, I realized, as I held her in my arms, was infinitely more dangerous. That night of shared, deliberate discovery unlocked something between us. The frantic desperation of our first encounter had been replaced by a deep, resonant chord of mutual worship, and it changed the very nature of our affair. It was no longer about a frantic escape. It became a destination in itself. Our secret life developed its own rhythm, a clandestine pulse beating beneath the placid surface of our suburban days. A text from her with a single word, "tonight," would send a jolt through my system, making the world around me fade to gray. My excuses to Sarah became smoother, more practiced. A late project at the office, a fictional dinner with a client, a sudden need to run an errand. Each lie was a stepping stone on the path back to Maya's bed. Our third encounter set the new tone. I arrived at her door on a Tuesday evening, the sky outside a bruised purple. She opened the door, and instead of leading me upstairs, she simply smiled and walked away, a silent invitation to follow. I found her in the bedroom, the lamplight casting its familiar golden glow. She was standing by the window, looking out at my house, her back to me. She was wearing a robe of dark red silk. As I stepped into the room, she let it slide from her shoulders to the floor in a single, fluid motion. Underneath, she wore a set of black lace lingerie that seemed designed to both conceal and reveal, its intricate patterns a dark web against her pale skin. It was a statement. This was not just happening to us anymore. We were making it happen. This was a performance, a ritual, and I was her sole captivated audience. I went to her, my hands tracing the delicate straps of the bra, my lips finding the sensitive skin of her neck. The slow, exploratory phase was over. We knew each other's bodies now, and we were hungry for more. I turned her to face me and kissed her, a deep, knowing kiss. And then I carried her to the bed. We started slow, facing each other, our legs tangled, my hands braced on either side of her head. I wanted to watch her face as I entered her. I pushed into her warm, wet heat, and her eyes fluttered shut for a moment, a soft gasp escaping her lips. We moved together in a slow, deliberate rhythm, our eyes locked. In this position, there was no hiding. I saw every flicker of pleasure in her expression, the way her lips parted, the faint blush that crept up her chest. I heard every soft sigh, every whispered plea. This was intimate, a connection of souls as much as bodies, but the slowness couldn't last. The fire between us always demanded more fuel. She rolled me onto my back, her eyes alight with a fierce, playful power. She straddled me, her black lace-clad hips swaying as she lowered herself onto me, taking me inside her with a slow, deliberate motion that made me groan. With her in control, I was free to simply feel, to watch. It was a mesmerizing sight, the way her perfect, round breasts swayed with her movements, the intense look of concentration on her face as she found a rhythm that pleased her, the way she would throw her head back, her dark hair cascading down her back, as a particularly deep thrust sent a shudder through her. She rode me with a confident, powerful grace, her body moving with an innate understanding of pleasure, both hers and mine. But it was when I took her from behind that the last of our restraints truly shattered. I eased her onto her stomach, her face buried in the soft pillows, her hips arched high to meet me. In this position, something primal took over. The politeness of our suburban lives was stripped away. leaving only the raw, animal core of our desire. My hands gripped her hips, my fingers digging into her soft flesh, guiding her, controlling her. I thrust into her from behind, a deep, powerful rhythm that was all instinct. With her face hidden, her moans were no longer stifled. They were muffled by the pillows, but they were louder, deeper, less inhibited. They were a symphony of pure, carnal pleasure composed just for me. And the sounds, God, the sounds. In the quiet of the bedroom, every noise was amplified. It was the wet, slick percussion of our bodies meeting, a rhythmic, slapping sound that was the most erotic music I had ever heard. It was the sound I now know the Vietnamese so perfectly describe as no, a thick, wet sound of deep, satisfying friction. It was the sound of my hand slapping against her perfect, round bottom, leaving a pink mark that she would press against later with a secret smile. It was the sound of the bed frame groaning in protest under the force of our passion. It was the sound of her voice, no longer whispering my name, but crying it out, her cries half sob, half song, as I pushed her closer and closer to the edge. "Ethan, right there. Please, don't stop," she would beg, her voice thick with lust, and I would push deeper, faster, my own control slipping, driven on by her cries, by the incredible feeling of her body clenching around me. I loved watching her lose herself. I loved being the one to make her writhe, to make her arch her back and call out my name as the waves of her orgasm crashed over her. Her pleasure was my pleasure, her release my ultimate goal. And when I felt her climax, that incredible, tightening ripple deep inside her, I would let myself go. My own release, a violent, guttural roar into the quiet of the room. These became our rituals. Stolen hours where we would descend into the depths of our desire. We explored every corner of her bed, every position our bodies could find. On the floor, against the wall, draped over a chair. Each time was a new discovery, a new layer of passion peeled back. The black lace was joined by fiery red silk, by innocent-looking white cotton that was somehow the most erotic of all. The affair was no longer a simple secret. It was a fully formed world, with its own rules, its own language, its own soundtrack. In that room, with Maya, I was not a husband or a father or an architect. I was a lover. I was a god. We would lie tangled in the damp sheets afterwards, our bodies spent and sated, the air thick with the smell of sex. We wouldn't talk about the outside world. We didn't dare. We would just lie there, our bodies still humming, listening to the sound of our mingled heartbeats, two sinners basking in the beautiful, warm glow of our damnation. You would think that the most dangerous part of an affair is the sex itself, the risk of discovery, the physical act of betrayal. But you would be wrong. The most dangerous part is the quiet that comes after. It's the moments when your heart rates have returned to normal and your bodies are slick and cooling, when you are lying tangled in the sheets, breathless in the aftermath. It's the pillow talk. That is the real poison. That is where the simple, clean-cut sin of lust gets hopelessly tangled in the messy, complicated wires of emotion. For us, it started subtly. In the beginning, after our frantic, explosive encounters, a kind of panicked reality would set in. I would dress quickly, give her a hurried, almost guilty kiss, and slip back across the lawn to my own life, the phantom of my betrayal chasing me all the way. But as our encounters deepened, as we learned the language of each other's bodies, the departure became slower. The silence afterwards became less about guilt and more about a shared, sated intimacy. We would lie there, her head on my chest, my fingers idly tracing patterns on her bare back, and we would talk. At first, the conversations were light, whispers in the dark about our days, about books we were reading, about silly, meaningless things. But the comfort of the physical intimacy began to bleed into the emotional. The bed, the site of our transgressions, became a confessional. She told me about her ex-husband, not with bitterness, but with a sad, weary resignation, painting a picture of a man who slowly erased her, who saw her not as a partner but as an accessory to his own life. She spoke of her dream to open a small art gallery one day, a dream she had shelved for her marriage. And as she spoke, Her eyes would light up with a passion I had never seen in her before, and I, in turn, found myself opening up to her in ways I never had with anyone, least of all my wife. With Sarah, our conversations were a shared ledger of domestic logistics, bills, schedules, repairs. With Maya, I spoke of the ghost of the man I used to be. I told her how I'd wanted to design challenging, artistic buildings, not the sterile, cookie-cutter suburban homes that paid the bills. I confessed my fear that I had peaked too early, that the rest of my life was just a slow, gentle decline into obscurity. She listened. She didn't try to fix it or offer platitudes. She just listened, her gaze full of a deep, empathetic understanding that made me feel, for the first time in years, completely and utterly seen. The sex was the key that unlocked the door, but these conversations, this bearing of our broken pieces, was what truly led us inside one another. I tried to deny what was happening. I told myself that this was just part of the affair, an illusion of connection born from the intensity of the sex. I told myself I loved my wife, and that was a fact, solid and true. And it was. I loved Sarah. I loved the life we had built, the family we had created. But lying there with Maya, with her warm body curled against mine, her scent filling my senses, I was forced to admit a terrifying truth. I was falling in love with her. It was a different kind of love, a dangerous, consuming fire compared to the steady, reliable warmth of my love for Sarah. It was the difference between a harbor and a storm. I needed the harbor to survive, but God, I craved the storm. The storm made me feel alive. The poison began to work its magic one late afternoon. We had made love with a slow, languid passion, and we were lying facing each other, the setting sun casting long shadows across the room. She was tracing the line of my jaw with her fingertip, her expression soft and thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" I whispered. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she met my eyes. Her own gaze so direct and vulnerable, it was like a physical blow. "Us," she said softly. "I'm thinking about us." "Where is this going, Ethan?" The question hung in the air, instantly changing the temperature of the room. It was the one question I had desperately avoided asking myself. Our affair had existed in a blissful, irresponsible present. We were a secret bubble, floating outside of time, with no past and no future. But her question, her simple, honest question, pricked that bubble. It brought the future, with all its impossible complications, crashing into our sacred, profane space. I didn't have an answer. My mind raced. What could I say? That this was just about sex? It would be a lie, and it would crush her. That I would leave my wife for her? The thought sent a spike of pure terror through me. I imagined my children's faces, Sarah's devastation. It was unthinkable. I fumbled for words, my sudden silence a more damning answer than anything I could have said. I don't know, Maya. I finally managed, my voice sounding weak and hollow. I enjoy being with you. I haven't thought beyond that. I saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes before she masked it. She pulled her hand away and rolled onto her back, creating a small, cold space between us. "It's okay," she said, her voice a little too bright. "It was a stupid question, but it wasn't a stupid question. It was the only question that mattered, and we both knew it." A few days later, she pushed again, this time more directly. We were getting dressed after another encounter, the mood now tinged with the awkwardness of our last conversation. As I was buttoning my shirt, she came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and resting her cheek against my back. "Do you love me?" she whispered, her voice so small I almost didn't hear it. The question stopped my heart. I stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to breathe. I did. God help me, I did. The answer was a scream in my soul, but saying it out loud would give it a reality I couldn't handle. It would turn our beautiful, broken thing into a promise I could never keep. To say yes would be the cruelest lie of all. To say no would be a lie of a different kind, and it would shatter us both. I turned in her arms and held her face in my hands. I looked into her hopeful, waiting eyes and did the only thing a coward could do. I kissed her. I kissed her to silence the question, to postpone the answer, to lose myself once more in the physical escape so I wouldn't have to confront the emotional wreckage. But it was too late. The poison was in the system. The escape hatch had been sealed. My affair with Maya, once a simple flight from the prison of my life, had now become its own gilded cage, one built of shared secrets, impossible feelings, and the heartbreaking, unanswerable questions of a future that could never be. The weeks following our difficult conversations were fraught with a new kind of tension. The unspoken questions about love and the future hung in the air between us, a ghost at every encounter. We tried to ignore it, to lose ourselves once more in the purely physical, but something had irrevocably shifted. The poison of emotion was working on us, making our stolen moments feel both more profound and more perilous. We grew careless, emboldened by our success at secrecy, believing our secret world was impenetrable. It was a foolish, arrogant delusion, and reality was about to bring it crashing down with the force of a battering ram. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in late September. I had told Sarah I had a long lunch meeting across town, a lie that gave me a solid 3-hour window. Maya and I, seeking a different kind of intimacy, had foregone the bedroom. We were downstairs in her living room, on her large, soft sofa. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. We were half-dressed, lost in a lazy, sensual haze, kissing slowly, our limbs tangled. There was no frantic passion, just a deep, comfortable longing. It felt safe, it felt domestic, and that was the most dangerous feeling of all. I was trailing kisses down her neck, my hand tangled in her dark hair, when I heard it. A familiar, rattling sound from outside, followed by a metallic clatter. It was the sound of a bicycle being dropped carelessly onto the pavement. My body went rigid. It was a sound I heard a dozen times a week. It was the sound of my 10-year-old son Leo arriving home. My blood ran cold. I lifted my head, my eyes wide with a terror so absolute it stole my breath. Maya saw the look on my face, and her own expression transformed from soft desire to stark panic. "What is it?" she whispered. Then we heard the voice, high and clear, cutting through the quiet afternoon air. "Dad, are you in there?" It was Leo. He was on her porch. My heart stopped. It didn't just pound. It ceased to function for a full second before exploding into a frantic, hammering rhythm that echoed in my ears. School must have let out early. A practice must have been canceled. The reasons didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that my son, my innocent son, was standing on the other side of a door that separated my two worlds, worlds that were never ever supposed to touch. What followed was a blur of pure animal panic. We scrambled off the sofa, our movements clumsy and desperate. "Get dressed," I hissed, my voice a strangled whisper. I was fumbling with my own belt buckle, my fingers feeling like useless, fat sausages. Maya was grabbing her shirt, her face as white as a sheet. My eyes darted around the room, seeing everything with a horrifying new clarity. 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, her bra lying on the floor by the armchair, my shoes kicked off by the door. The plumped cushions of the sofa, indented with the shape of our bodies. It was a crime scene, and we were the criminals, desperately trying to wipe away the evidence before the detective arrived. A sharp knock on the front door. "Dad? I know you're in here. I saw your car." Leo's voice was closer now, laced with a child's impatient curiosity. "Go upstairs," I mouthed to Maya, my eyes wide with terror. "Hide." She didn't argue. She scooped up her bra, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of fear and humiliation, and fled up the stairs just as I shoved my feet into my shoes and frantically tucked in my shirt. I took one last desperate look around the room, snatched the wine glasses and shoved them behind a cushion, and smoothed my hair. I took a deep breath, trying to slow my racing heart, and walked to the door. When I opened it, the sight of my son's face was like a punch to the gut. He stood there, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face open and trusting and full of innocent questions. "Hey, buddy," I said, forcing a casual smile that felt like a painful grimace. "What are you doing home so early?" "Soccer practice got canceled. Coach is sick," he said, peering past me into the house. "Mom said you had a meeting." "What are you doing at Miss Davis's house?" The question was a scalpel, expertly dissecting my pathetic lie. I could feel sweat trickling down my back. I had to say something. Anything. "Oh yeah," I said, the lie forming on my lips with a nauseating ease. The meeting finished early. I was just on my way home when Miss Davis flagged me down. Her internet was acting up, so I was just taking a look at her router for her. The lie was plausible, it was simple, and he bought it. He just nodded, his trust in me absolute and unconditional. "Oh, okay. Can we get pizza tonight?" he asked, his mind already moving on, the crisis averted for him, but just beginning for me. "Sure, buddy," I said, my voice thick. "You head on home. I'll be right there. I just have to show her how to reset it." I watched him run across the lawn, a small, carefree figure in a world I was actively poisoning with my deceit. The trust in his eyes, the casual way he accepted my story, it was a brand on my soul. I had never felt so disgusting, so utterly foul, in my entire life. I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs threatening to give out. The adrenaline drained away, leaving a cold, hollow dread in its place. Maya crept down the stairs, her face pale, her arms wrapped around herself. The sensual, confident woman from 20 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a frightened, vulnerable stranger. The air between us was no longer charged with desire, but with the cold, acrid smoke of our near immolation. "I should go," I said, my voice flat. She just nodded, unable to meet my eyes. There was nothing left to say. The passion had been scorched out of the room, replaced by shame and fear. I walked out her door without another word, without a touch or a backward glance, feeling like a criminal fleeing the scene. That night, as I sat on the edge of Leo's bed, watching him sleep, the full weight of what I had done crashed down on me. His face, so peaceful in sleep, was the same face that had looked up at me with such simple, perfect trust just hours before. I had stood in my lover's house, my body still warm from her touch, and I had lied to him without flinching. The risk was no longer an abstract concept, a thrilling edge to our encounters. It was real. It had a name and a face, and it was sleeping in the bed in front of me. Our beautiful, secret world was a fantasy. It was a fragile house of cards built on a fault line, and I had just felt the first, violent tremor. The pleasure of the affair was now inextricably linked with the terror of this moment. Every future kiss would be tainted with the memory of my son's voice calling my name. Every touch would be haunted by the feeling of my own soul shriveling as I lied to his innocent face. I felt like a monster. For the first time, I truly understood that my escape wasn't just about me. It was a weapon aimed directly at the heart of everything I claimed to love. The near miss with my son was not a warning shot. It was a direct hit. The bullet of reality had torn through the fantasy, and our beautiful, secret world was bleeding out. In the days that followed, the fear never left me. It was a cold, metallic taste in the back of my throat, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety under my skin. Every time I looked at Leo, I saw his trusting face at Maya's door and felt a wave of self-loathing so powerful it made me physically nauseous. The joy I had found with Maya, the vibrant color she had painted over my gray life, was now tainted, poisoned by the terror of what I stood to lose. The affair, my great escape, had become the most terrifying prison of all. I was trapped between two impossible choices: a life with my family that felt like a slow death of the soul, or a potential future with Maya that would be built on the ashes of my children's happiness. There was no victory possible. Every path led to ruin. I lay awake night after night, staring at the ceiling, the agonizing equation turning over and over in my mind. And slowly, painfully, I came to the only conclusion a man who still possessed a shred of decency could reach. It had to end. I had to be the one to end it. I had to amputate the limb to save the body. I had to kill the most vibrant part of myself to protect the lives of the people I had a duty to protect. The decision settled in my heart like a block of ice. For a week, I rehearsed the words in my head, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The thought of seeing the light go out in her eyes, of being the one to cause her that pain, was an agony of its own. But the alternative, to let it continue until the inevitable, catastrophic implosion, was worse. Finally, on a cool, overcast Sunday afternoon while Sarah and the kids were at a birthday party, I knew the time had come. I walked across the lawn to her house for what I knew would be the last time. The 50 feet of grass that had once seemed like a charged, exciting pathway to paradise now felt like a green mile, the slow walk of a condemned man on his way to his own execution. She opened the door, a soft, welcoming smile on her face that faltered the moment she saw my expression. The hope in her eyes died instantly, replaced by a guarded, knowing sadness. She knew. She didn't have to ask. The verdict was written all over my face. "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice a dry croak. She simply nodded and stepped aside, letting me into the quiet of her home. We stood in her living room, the site of our near disaster, the air thick with unspoken words. "Maya," I began, my voice breaking. We can't do this anymore." The words, when they finally came out, sounded brutal and clumsy. I saw her flinch as if I had struck her. She didn't rage or yell. She just wrapped her arms around herself, a single tear tracing a silent path down her cheek. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "After what happened with Leo, I knew." We stood in that heartbreaking silence for what felt like an eternity, two souls at a funeral for a love that had never been allowed to be born. I wanted to comfort her, to hold her, but I knew that any touch would be a lie, a false promise. And yet, my body betrayed me. I saw the tear on her cheek, and I reached out, my thumb gently wiping it away. That single touch was our undoing. The moment my skin met hers, a current of shared grief and desperate longing passed between us. She leaned into my hand, her eyes closing, and a sob escaped her lips. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly, my own resolve crumbling. This wasn't about sex anymore. This was about comfort. This was about saying goodbye in the only way we knew how. One last time, she whispered against my chest, her voice choked with tears. It wasn't a question. It was a plea. A plea for one final memory to hold on to in the cold, lonely years to come. And I, in my weakness and my own selfish need for a final taste of paradise, couldn't deny her, couldn't deny myself. I led her by the hand up the stairs, each step heavy with the finality of our actions. In her bedroom, we didn't rip at each other's clothes with the fire of our earlier encounters. We undressed each other slowly, reverently, as if we were handling sacred relics. My hands trembled as I unbuttoned her blouse, my gaze memorizing the slope of her collarbone, the pale skin of her shoulders. She unbuckled my belt with the gentle care of a nurse, dressing a wound. When we were finally naked, we didn't fall upon each other. We just stood there, holding each other, two flawed, broken people about to share one last dance. I laid her on the bed and made love to her with an aching, heartbreaking slowness. Every touch was a farewell. I kissed her, and I could taste the salt of both our tears. I ran my hands over the curves of her body, not with lust, but with a desperate need to commit every detail to memory, the feel of her hip bone under my palm, the softness of her breast, the texture of her skin. This was not the symphony of pleasure we had once composed. This was a dirge, a mournful, beautiful piece of music played on the strings of our shared sorrow. I entered her gently, and we moved together in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. I looked deep into her eyes, and I saw my own pain reflected there. There were no ecstatic cries, no guttural moans of pleasure. There were only the soft, wet sounds of our bodies moving together, punctuated by her quiet sobs and my own choked-back grief. The pleasure was sharp, almost unbearable, because every wave of sensation was a reminder that this was the last time I would ever feel it. This was the last time I would feel her body wrapped around mine, the last time I would be inside her, the last time we would be one. It was the sweetest, most painful agony I have ever known. When we finally found our release, it wasn't the explosive, shuddering climax of our past. It was a quiet, simultaneous dissolving, a gentle spilling over that felt like both a merging and a final, sorrowful letting go. Afterward, we lay tangled together, but the comfortable silence of our afterglow was gone. In its place was a vast, cold emptiness, the silence of a tomb. The future we would never have was a palpable presence in the room, a third person in the bed with us. We both knew this was the end. Getting dressed was the final, brutal act of severance. As I pulled on my shirt and buckled my belt, I felt as if I were putting on a straitjacket, returning to the prison of my own life. I was safe now, but I was also numb. I stood by the door, ready to leave. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a sheet, looking small and fragile. I wanted to say I love you. The words were on the tip of my tongue, a burning, desperate truth, but I couldn't. To say it now would be the ultimate cruelty, a final twist of the knife. So I just looked at her, my heart breaking. "Goodbye, Maya," I whispered. "Goodbye, Ethan," she replied, her voice hollow. I turned and walked out of her room, down the stairs, and out her front door without looking back. I knew if I did, I would be lost. As I walked across the lawn, back to my quiet, orderly safe house, I felt a part of my soul tear away and stay behind in that sun-drenched bedroom. The dance was over. I had made my choice. I had chosen responsibility over passion, duty over desire, safety over life. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I would be paying for it for the rest of my life. And so I returned to where this confession began. It's past midnight, and the only sound in the room is the soft, rhythmic breathing of my wife, Sarah, beside me. But tonight is not the night after a stolen encounter. There is no phantom scent of jasmine on my skin, no lingering heat from a lover's touch. That was years ago. Tonight, like every other night for the past 5 years, there is only the quiet, orderly silence of my life and the loud, chaotic clamor of my memory. The storm is no longer raging. It has passed, leaving behind a permanent, desolate landscape where nothing new will ever grow. Maya is gone. 2 weeks after our last dance, our heartbreaking farewell, I woke up on a Saturday morning to the sight of a "for sale" sign hammered into her lawn. It was a brutal, efficient amputation. There was no tearful phone call, no dramatic confrontation, no final letter left in my mailbox. She simply vanished. I watched from my window as strangers toured her house, their presence a violation of our sacred space. I watched as the moving truck came, the reverse of the one that had brought her to me. And then one day, the house was empty again, and she was gone. I have never heard from her since. She became a ghost, a beautiful, haunting question mark at the center of my life. I did what I was supposed to do. I turned back to my family and threw myself into the role of the man I should have been all along. I became the perfect husband, the model father. I never missed a soccer game. I helped with homework every night. I planned date nights with Sarah, buying her flowers and complimenting her dress. I fixed the leaky faucet in our own kitchen. I painted the shutters. I did everything right. On the surface, our family healed. We are a portrait of suburban happiness, the kind of family people look at with a quiet, approving envy. They see Ethan, the devoted family man. They have no idea that they are looking at a walking, talking mausoleum, a monument to a dead man who still, inexplicably, breathes. My love for Sarah settled into a kind of gentle, platonic affection. We are partners. We are friends. We run our household with a quiet, seamless efficiency, but the space in our bed has never been wider. Sometimes, she'll reach for me in the dark, her touch a familiar comfort. I respond. I go through the motions. I perform the act of a husband, but my body is a liar. My mind is somewhere else, years away, in a sun-drenched bedroom with a woman whose face is slowly, terrifyingly, starting to blur at the edges. Sarah knows something is broken, I think. She doesn't know what, but she feels the invisible wall between us, the secret I will carry to my grave. She stopped trying to climb it long ago. We live together in a state of peaceful, unspoken, emotional estrangement. My escape became my eternal prison. The world is a minefield of memories, each one ready to detonate when I least expect it. I'll be grilling burgers in the backyard, and the scent of jasmine from a neighbor's bush will drift over the fence, and for a heart-stopping second, I am back in her bed, my face buried in her hair. I'll hear a woman with a low, throaty laugh in the grocery store, and my head will whip around with a jolt of desperate, foolish hope. Her house, the house next door, is the worst. A new family lives there now, a young couple with a toddler. I see them through my kitchen window, living a life of noisy, chaotic, beautiful happiness. I see him kiss her as he leaves for work. I see them playing with their child on the lawn where I first saw Maya cry. Their happiness is a constant, quiet indictment of my own cowardice, a monument to the life I was too afraid to even consider. I lie here now, in the safety and security I chose, and I am haunted. I have the quiet life, the unbroken family, the respect of my community. I did the right thing. I am a good man. But as I listen to the steady breathing of my wife beside me, a profound, soul-deep question echoes in the hollow space where my heart used to be. The fire that Maya lit inside me is long gone, and all that remains is cold, gray ash. I look at the perfect, predictable, passionless landscape of my future, stretching out before me in an endless, unbroken line, and I have to ask, was it worth it? Was the safety of this harbor worth sacrificing the magnificent, terrifying, life-altering feeling of the storm? Was a long life, lived in the quiet twilight of regret, worth the price of never truly feeling alive at all?